Hello, I'm Mary Reese from the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association, as well as its Foundation for Educational Administration. And I'm really happy to welcome our keynotes today, who presented at the fall conference of NJPSA, FEA, and NJASCD. So with us today are Shafir and Jamila Dugan, who are the authors of the book that we adore called Street Data. And we're here today to talk a little bit more about the concepts that they presented to us during our keynote this morning. So we talked about the fact that you both wrote The Listening Leader prior to Street Data. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it relates to Street Data?
Thank you for having us, first of all, Mary. I started writing The Listening Leader around 2015, really out of some of the painful lessons of having been a principal and not had all of the relational leadership skills that I feel I needed to be successful as a school leader. And along that writing process, I had the amazing good fortune of being introduced to Dr. J, or Jamila, who was getting her PhD in educational leadership for equity, and invited her to do a lot of the research behind Listening Leader, which was fantastic. And the connection to Street Data is it was just sort of a cameo appearance in Listening Leader in chapter 1. There are 5 sort of barriers around equity that chapter explores. One of them is disconnected data. And in that section, I talked about these 3 levels of data: satellite, map, and street, and how they often play out in our schools. And the source or the inspiration behind that metaphor, that idea, actually came from a time where I was working at the National Equity Project in Oakland. And I was a literacy coach working with teachers. And we had some folks come train us from Baruch College about 3 types of reading data and how there was large grain, medium grain, and small grain. So just the idea of different types of data really stuck with me and then eventually evolved into that metaphor.
Cool.
Maybe Jamila could talk about how it became its own book.
And maybe talk a little bit about the research that you did to promote it.
Great. Thank you for having us. In terms of the research that was a part of the Listening Leader, I think one of the things I was really interested in is seeing the connection between listening and how it changes relationships between folks. And so it was really interesting to see the research that says that only 2% of leaders are trained in listening, but we do a lot of listening all the time. So I think there was a lot of interesting data points there. But as Shane said, people were really interested in the idea of street data. It was like really bubbling up for people as we were doing trainings related to that text, which then, as you already said, led to street data.
Well, you mentioned in your presentation today, one of the questions was, will we teach and lead to transform education?
Yeah.
Which I think is critical.
Yeah.
And can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so when I think about that question around teaching and leading to transform, I think I have not yet really met a leader that didn't want to do right by kids. I haven't met anyone like that. I hope I never meet anyone like that. But I think because we have such an obsession with satellite data, what we really care about gets lost. And then we start to focus on teaching and leading to move the bubble kids, or teaching and leading to make sure you don't lose teachers because you have a teacher shortage, which is a very, very real thing. But it then sometimes takes away our ability to think about what we're actually trying to do. So I think that that's just a provocation around what we're actually up to when we talk about taking up education. Is it about moving the edges, or is it about something fundamentally different, i.e. transformational?
Okay. So I really like your idea of moving from a deficit way of looking at folks, students, adults in our lives, to an abundance mindset. So can you tell us more about that?
Oh, I'm happy to just start on this one. So I think this concept of moving from a deficit mindset to an abundance mindset is extremely important, but it's not new. So I was just reading Dr. Asa Hilliard's work not too long ago, and the very beginnings of his book just address and say how important it is for us to not start in the place of the deficit thinking. And so I think the writing around that is more of an affirmation of those ideas. And so many educators have talked about them. And so I think some of, at least for me, what comes up when we say moving from a deficit mindset to an abundance mindset is a remembering that we are so steeped already in deficit thinking and ways of being. And we kind of know, or a lot of people do know, that it's problematic and want to move toward an abundance place, but are so steeped in that smog around the deficit base, but that it almost seems, dare I say, impossible to be in a place of abundance. So I feel like that provocation is almost a reminder of like, we already know all these deficit. You saw Shane kind of outline all these different ways that deficit thinking can create lots of problems. But trying to just remind folks that that shift is a possibility thing if we take it up. So that's what comes up for me. I don't know what you would add to that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking right now about how much the test and punish era in the wake of No Child Left Behind just really tethered us to this deficit language, right? Because of the very design of it was to try to fill gaps or fix quote unquote kids and schools and teachers. And I think it's like now sort of in the DNA of the system in a way that, as we just talked about in the workshop we did, it's very hard to eradicate. It's very hard to pull out. But abundance also, right, has always existed, as Jamil said, in the literature, long before the literature, in communities. And so how do we get back to the knowledge and the brilliance that's already there, and give ourselves permission to, really redesign from a place of possibility?
One of the projects I've been involved with for years is around arts integration, bringing the arts together with other content areas. And it's amazing how joyful classrooms become when the arts become a part of it. It really, and it also promotes students who perhaps may have been on the sidelines by allowing them to expand their creativity in a different way. So abundance is something that we strive for here in all the projects in which we're engaged. And then you talked about the difference in languages, the shift that you're talking about, which we certainly support at NJPSA and FEA, particularly through our healing-centered engagement work. But we no longer say, what's wrong with you? We say, what's right with you, what matters to you, how can we help you? And you've built that into this work as well. And can you tell us why you've shifted in that regard?
I don't think I have a good answer for that. Why we've shifted from the orientation to
language.
problems
No,
into
right.
possibilities.
Is it a result of your work with other educators and listening to them? Is it a result of the research that you've done? It certainly is the path that we also should pursue, but we don't necessarily do that.
I wrote in the book I've been working on about my grandparents who lived in New Jersey when I was a kid, and how they always treated me as an intellectual being, even as a child, as somebody who had ideas, who had things to say. And, I think I've always really believed that every child has ideas that are worthy of being centered and heard and elevated. And I hope that my classroom when I was a teacher felt like an abundant space. But these systems, these deficit systems, and these kind of, whether we're talking about the test and punish or white saviorism or all these different forces, they're so tenacious. I think it can get in the way of just gravitating toward what is an assessment design, what's an instructional design that's actually going to elevate students' voices and students' ideas, which are, they're waiting, right? They want to be heard. They want to be seen and witnessed. But how do we get all of the detritus out of the way so that they can be the center of the educational experience?
I think the only thing I would add would be, I don't know if is a personal shift, as much as I know I've gone back to this idea of remembering, but I don't think that when I went into teaching, I was thinking about what the problem is. But when I went into my teaching program, I was told what the problem is, and the problem is the achievement gap. And that's a language that I learned, and therefore I was trying to figure out how I could solve the achievement gap. Even when I went to get my doctorate, I was still trying to figure out, what does the research say about changing or fixing the achievement gap. And that pulled me away from what I already had known when I came in. Right, I wasn't thinking about solving a problem. I just wanted to support girls like me. And so I think that I struggle with the language of shift, because I think that I don't think I ever came in with an orientation to fixing a problem. And I think the people that inspire me most never had that orientation. So I don't like to listen to people really at this point that are having to make the shift, if you will. I may invite you into making that shift, but so much of this is like a remembering of things and unlearning language that was not helpful to the trajectory or vision that I may have had for myself, but certainly was encouraged by elders and community members to have, if that makes sense.
Of course.
Okay.
And finally, because we need to move on to lunch, dreaming big is your message. And I mean, it's just wonderful to celebrate people with whom you speak and reminding them to do that and tell them that, that's a journey as well.
It really is.
But, what are your final last thoughts to our audience related to dreaming big vis-a-vis your work?
I could start by saying that when people hear us say dream big, I think it inspires some people. But I think some people think of it as like a lofty cloud, head in the clouds, Disney kind of idea, and that it doesn't necessarily belong in the place of school. Maybe the word vision, people have sometimes an easier way to chew on it. But in my particular research, specifically research from Robin D.G. Kelley about liberation movements, he found that every single one of them started with agitation and radical dreaming. So when I think about giving final words around the idea of dreaming big, it's a responsibility, it's a gift, it's an honor, and it is very hard to do in this kind of system. There's so many times where I don't feel like dreaming. I just want to lay in my bed. And at the same time, anytime that I allow myself to dream about what is possible, whether it's for kids, in the system or my own children, it gives me like more gas in my tank and allows me to feel the abundance and the sense of possibility. So when people hear us say dream big, we actually really mean that, and mean it from a place of starting with the reality of what is, which is not often rooted in an abundance place when we talk about the overarching system, and just taking a step back and saying, what if I just did put my Disney hat on for a moment, or whatever you want to call it? What would happen if I just put it on for a second and just played around with dreaming about what's possible, and just see what that does for me. I really encourage people to actually, you hear those things that like sound really great, dream big, but
what does it feel like?
Yes, take a moment and actually hear it, and then try it out. Would be my thought on that.
Lovely. So in chapter 5 of Street Data, the core stance is equity work is first and foremost pedagogical. And the place of dreaming that I've been in for the last year and a half is around pedagogy and what are the learning experiences that children are hungry for, that they are, as Jamil pointed out in our workshop today, asking for over and over and over and over again, and that we can design toward, that we can shape pedagogical choices to create. And those are, in my heart and my mind right now, those are experiences that awaken agency, as we talked about today. Student sense of identity, belonging, inquiry is what it is in the next book, rather than mastery, and then efficacy. And I feel like maybe we've lost some capacity to dream about how classrooms can look differently in the last 15 or 20 years. But I just sense that people are really, really craving that space of dreaming as well right now. And there's a temptation to quote unquote do street data very far from the classroom, to use it to kind of shape everything else about the school policies and school culture and discipline and all these things. And that's all good and well. But at the end of the day, right, where do our babies spend 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day in the classroom? And if they don't have a voice or they can't move, like our beloved Gia was talking about today, and they're trapped in their chairs, those are the things we need to be able to shift. And I think we can. I think people are ready. They're ready for that level of reimagination and dreaming. So I'm excited about thinking about that with the field.
Wonderful. And as was mentioned today several times, we have several projects here at NJPSA and FEA. We have an Equity Academy, we have a Leadership Academy, we have the New Jersey Institute for School Leadership, and your work is infused throughout these models, primarily around problems of practice at the school level. So certainly we support that, and we're just thrilled that you decided to come and speak with our New Jersey leaders. So I thank you very much.
Thank you for
Appreciate
the invitation. Really honored
Thanks.
to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. You could have reached out to anyone in the world, and yet you reached out to us. So we really appreciate
As
it.
I told you, you have many followers in your state. So they were thrilled to be in your presence. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary.